Hi, I'm John Paul and a really warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. What I wanted to talk today about is a second video on bisexual identity. The reason for doing that is that a number of people have asked since the first video. It's one of the most watched videos on the channel and liked as well, so I thought I would do a further video on it. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about relationship with self, so self-acceptance and valuing that part of self. And then moving on to how and why it may need to be brought into as well relationships with others and the various forms that that can take too. And then finishing off with a bit of a word of warning about therapy, therapists, and talking about a bisexual identity within that environment. So, going back to self-acceptance and looking at that and relationship with self, one of the points that I made in the first video that I did was the key importance of not splitting off any part of self or seeing any particular part of ourselves as an enemy or as somehow threatening or problematic. Now, I completely understand we're physiologically in some way set up to do that. And in terms of sexuality, sort of atypical sexuality, there are lots of messages coming in externally from people, various people throughout life, which will probably sort of affirm or encourage or amplify some sort of splitting off. But as I say, it's very important, I think, that we have a relationship, a good relationship with all parts of ourselves, particularly in relation to sexuality, which is such an intrinsic part of who we are. If we divide ourselves from a part, we're probably going to be left to experience emotional symptoms, perhaps anxiety, depression, chronic anger, perhaps look to addictive behaviour as well in order to rebalance things. That's really what people who are looking to behaviours and substances are trying to do. They're trying to make themselves feel better. And if we are sort of fighting internally with a particular part of us, our identity, sexuality, then you can see that on an ongoing basis, that's very likely to lead to consistently feeling less safe in the world than we might, frustrated, irritated, annoyed, all those things. So I think it's very important that we look for a way to integrate, align all parts of self. There's always going to be internal conflicts. That's part of being human. There's going to be, short-term versus long-term. People can love, they can hate relatively quickly. There are lots of parts which are in conflict and negotiations, dialogue going on all the time between these internal parts. But I think certainly in relation to, say, a bisexual identity, making sure that's something that's the very least accepted and actually, as I say, potentially valued is really, really important if we want to make sure that all of our thought, feeling and behavioural energy is going into being creative, connection. If we separate ourselves from it, there are two things, as I say, we're going to experience emotional symptoms potentially as a result, and also, which is another point that I made in the first video, very importantly, we will miss out on the kind of power, creativity, energy that's within that sexuality. And also, it's not just about sexuality, of course, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. It's about, emotional experience, romantic feelings. There's a lot of energy in those. There's a lot of potential power for people. So to live an aligned life where all parts of self are accepted and more often than not working together leads to a happy, fulfilled and purposeful life more often than not for people. So lots of reasons why I really think that we need to be looking at sort of accepting all parts of ourselves, and as I say, in this specific situation, including a bisexual identity. If we're looking at acceptance, one thing I think is very key is to know what it is that we're accepting. As I sort of referred to a bit earlier, lots of the time our ideas about things will be coming in from other people. So if you do experience having a bisexual identity, your ideas around that will be sort of recycled ideas that other people have told you, whether that's in playgrounds or teachers or parents or on the television. And you'll be operating on that basis at the moment, and you may not be conscious necessarily of what that definition is, or you might have internalized a definition which doesn't work very well for you or leaves you in conflict with that part. So I thought in terms of self-acceptance, it would be helpful just to look at a couple of definitions. The first one I have put below the first video, this is paraphrasing somebody else's definition. So it's the capacity to be physically and or emotionally attracted to multiple genders. There's also another definition which I've seen by somebody by the name of Robin Ox, and they say they call themselves bisexual because they acknowledge in themselves a potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one sex. So both of those definitions, I think, are very helpful definitions in a few ways. They identify that it's romantic, potentially emotional, and or sexual. I think with the word bisexuality, there are sort of myths that come with it in terms of it being a sort of hyper-sexualized, really, and it's all about wanting to have sex with as many people as possible, and it being that somebody will want to have sex with everybody in the room, kind of thing. I mean, it's important, as I say, to look at what your understanding of it is and what the kind of messages that have come from other people are. But words like capacity, words like potential, therefore, I think really more accurately reflect what people's experience might be. It's a capacity for intimacy across multiple genders. It's a capacity for a sexual relationship across multiple genders. And if you use words like capacity, if you use words like potential, I think you might be able to get to a stage as well where you can see it as something that's quite valuable in life. The potential, the capacity to have sexual intimacy with multiple genders, the capacity particularly, I think, to have emotional intimacy with multiple genders. I mean, it then, of course, goes straight into romantic attachment too, but it's actually good to have a lot of capacity and potential in terms of intimacy, I would say. So as far as acceptance of it, certainly, I think that's an essential part of people's process, I hope, and also it may be that we can also move to valuing it too. In that definition by Robin Ox, they also go on to say it's not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree. So it's not that someone is going to somebody might have a sort of predominant sexual attraction to opposite sex and then romantic to same sex, or the other way around, predominant sexual attraction to same sex, but romantically, emotionally find easier to have intimacy with opposite sex. And I think that's important to look at the kind of fluidity around that and the variety and range between various people. The other thing that I would say, though, is that something which is often said about bisexuality can be that it's a sort of phase or something that people are going through, that it's a stage, a journey. And the thing that for some people, they probably use the word, they describe themselves as that to others. Perhaps they are on a journey. It is something that they are, something is unfolding in terms of their sexuality. I think for a lot of people, though, the experience of bisexuality with the fluidity in it that I've just described, it is a static experience. That is how they experience themselves and the world. That is how they experience themselves and others sexually. That's how they experience themselves and others romantically, emotionally. It has always been like that since they've had those feelings, emotions towards others, and it will always be like that. And again, I think that's something, you will decide your definition of it. But I think those two ideas, those containing those concepts, are hopefully quite helpful for you there. Then moving on to bringing it in relationship with others, which can be the big thing with people. I mean, some people's journey, of course, will be self-acceptance and that internal dialogue and how it sits internally in their internal landscape. But moving on to the external landscape and the extent to which we bring a bisexual identity, anything in terms of our sexuality, into relationship with others. And then I think there are three possibilities there to look at. The first will be listening and watching other people talk about their experiences through podcasts, television, films, through reading. So again, it's very much watching, listening. And from that point of view, if we do that and we bring other people in that way, we are not leaving that part alone. Of course, self-acceptance is making sure it's not left alone internally for us in our internal landscape. There is something I think important about bringing it somehow into relationship with others too. In terms of loneliness, I did the video on that, and one of the things that I said within the loneliness video is that quote, and I can't remember who it's by at the moment, but that loneliness is not about not having people around us, but it's about not being able to talk about the things that are important to us. I will come on to talking to others about a bisexual identity in a minute. But to hear others talk about it, to read others' experiences, I think is making sure that that part is not left lonely, and that somehow it's given life and expression. And I think that's the key thing here. Life and expression, both in our internal landscape with self-acceptance and valuing it for ourselves, but also somehow bringing it into relationship with others. So there's the sort of watching and listening aspect of things, then moving on to talking to other people with a similar identity. So actually sort of interactions with others within, I suppose you might describe as support groups. There's a couple of people that have asked me about those. There are some on Meetup, for example. So it could be online in terms of typing, it can be online as far as video, and of course it could be face-to-face as far as meeting up with groups, and to share a shared experience with whatever it is that human beings experience and have some difficulty with. To do that with others can be a very healing and positive experience. To talk about another quote, shame dies where stories are told, in safe places. And you would hope that in a support group, if that's what we want to call it, that is a safe place within which to bring all experience. And that doesn't, of course, mean that all somebody's doing the whole time is talking about their sexual identity and what it means. It's just there's something very much about that being a part of you, people being aware that that's a part of you, and that you still being accepted, loved, enjoyed, and vice versa with other people, with that as a conscious part of everybody's awareness. So certainly, those can be very important and helpful for people. And some people may stop there. Some people may stop in terms of this journey as far as self-acceptance. Other people may want to do the sort of watching and listening side of things. Other people may then also want to bring it into relationship by being around people who have a shared experience. I was talking about shame. Certainly, a lot of people internalise in terms of a bisexual identity, in terms of same-sex attraction. Over the years, what they internalise is shame and fear around it. And therefore, it is not something that anybody should be ashamed of, but it's very understandable from the point of view of our survival parts of our brain that people do worry. And to bring it into relationship with others, for that to be part of who you are and part of who they are, and for that just to be sort of beautifully ordinary in terms of the relationship that you have, is a very powerful and healing experience, as I say, for lots of people. And then moving on to, I suppose you might say, in terms of coming out, but also being part of a meetup group could be the same thing. But looking then at that area of, talking to friends, family, so people that are actually already in your life who may not know. Again, look, everybody's going to be different there. There's no shoulds or ought tos in this. When I did the first video, I sort of made that clear. I think that what's important is that you do the things that feel right for you. There isn't a story or a prescribed way of doing this or being in terms of it. People have very different experiences. All human beings are different. If you look at introversion and extroversion, for example, some people who are more introverted work things out themselves and then go out to the world with it. Some people who are more extroverted tend to work things out in relationship with other people. So if you're looking at, say, a bisexual identity, a more extroverted person might need other people a bit more to be able to look at what's happening for them, work things out and what they want to do next, whereas somebody more introverted can experience sort of peace and acceptance and valuing around it potentially without doing that. So what's very important here is that you do things at your pace, that you do things that you feel comfortable with. But if you're looking at all these things as well, bearing in mind that if shame and fear build up around something, we build up these fears of catastrophe if we do tell people. And most people's experience of telling others that love them is that it is absolutely accepted and is not the catastrophic event that they believed it was going to be. So if you're looking at, as I say, coming out to friends, family, most often people's experience is that's actually going to be a positive experience. And actually, that it isn't about, therefore, talking about emotional sexual intimacy all the time with that person. It as I say, it just becomes beautifully ordinary, that they're aware of it, and on some level with you, and then you get on with talking about your day. Your sexual, romantic interests, attractions are of course up to you who you bring that into relationship with, but always bearing in mind that to be ashamed of any part, to be fearful of it, to be split off from it, is going to leave that part alone, and it's going to be unhelpful, I think, for your emotional and also your physical well-being. If you do tell somebody who you love and you would say loves you, and the experience of it is a disconnected one, I think I would look pretty carefully and pay careful attention to what's happening in that relationship in terms of the kind of depth of connection. It ought to be true that there's nothing that we can say that will ruin a real connection with another person. So I think do hold that in mind when we're looking at other people's responses. I understand everybody is absolutely doing their best. The survival fear part is dominant in all human beings, and people may be fearful, for example, for you if you do tell them about it or talk to them about it. But certainly if somebody doesn't reach a point of connection, at least acceptance, even valuing, that's probably a relationship to pay attention to. Moving on, just to talk about therapy, that's one of the places in terms of relationships with others, and that sort of safe place where people might begin their journey as far as bringing something into relationship with others, or even as far as self-acceptance and valuing that part of self. The thing that I would say about therapy, I think it's an amazing place to do that. It's that sort of non-judgmental. It's a place where we can orientate ourselves, work out what the relationship is like sexually, try and diffuse some of the shame, work on the anxiety and the fear, and then you might, you get left with what is there without those things, and that gives some people a much clearer view about what their relationship is with their sexuality and what this bisexual identity means to them. The thing that I really would bear in mind, though, is that I was 10 years ago in a supervision group, and somebody brought a client that had identified as bisexual, and the supervisor there, who's the person who's sort of in charge or facilitating in the group, said that they believed that bisexuality was the least evolved form of sexuality because somebody couldn't make up their mind whether they were attracted to men or women. Now, that's an unusual view, I would say, but I would not suggest that you go to see a therapist who holds that view of a bisexual identity or any kind of same-sex attraction. There are sort of historical views somewhere within psychotherapy, not the sort of psychotherapy that I follow, but certain theories which sort of pathologize in the same way same-sex attraction. I think, it was in the psychiatric manual, homosexuality, up until relatively recently. So there will be therapists out there who hold views that I think will disconnect or perpetuate a disconnection, shame, fear, anger around a bisexual identity, same-sex attraction. How do you make sure that's not the case? With the therapist that you're going to, bearing in mind, of course, it's entirely up to you, the therapist that you go to. If you choose to go and see somebody who holds that view, then of course that's up to you. But I think if the fundamental here, as far as bringing things into relationship with others, that's one thing. Certainly, as far as self-acceptance, as far as valuing it within ourselves, integrating it within ourselves, to me, that's absolutely a fundamental if we want to have good physical and emotional well-being. So do ask your therapist, if you're going to go and see somebody and talk to somebody about it, the specific question, what they believe about bisexuality, a bisexual identity, and see what they say. Most therapists should be able to understand why you're asking the question and give you an open and honest answer about it. So I definitely would say that if you are going to talk to a therapist about it, and as I say, it can be very valuable and very important to do that if you are struggling in any way. And also, even if you're not struggling, just to work out what you might want to do and kind of orientate yourself with this part of yourself, both in relation to yourself, but also in relationship with other people too. And the last thing I wanted to say is just around a lot of people get into relationship with people of the opposite sex, even if they have a bisexual identity. There was a statistic that I've put in the first video. I don't know if it's 9 out of 10 people with a bisexual identity who would identify in that way are actually in opposite sex relationships or straight relationships, however you'd describe it. So there is something, of course, people can negotiate whatever they want and can negotiate within a relationship. Perhaps, they have a relationship with an opposite sex person and can introduce sort of sexual partners, other partners, emotionally, same sex, whatever people want to do and can negotiate. I think for a lot of people, though, that isn't something that they do negotiate within a relationship. The other person and they would like a long-term monogamous relationship with one person. And then that does lead, as I say, to the thing that I'd like to finish up on, which is that there is the potential, therefore, if that's the situation, for a part to be unlived in some ways. If you choose to be in a relationship with an opposite sex person, there is a same sex part which sexually, potentially romantically, emotionally will go unlived. And I suppose it's a question there that I would like to ask. If that's something that you're experiencing, I'd be interested to know how you deal with that. I think it's important to be conscious of that part, to be aware of it, and sort of to take care of it. You can imagine if there is a part that is not lived necessarily in that way. As I say, what I was talking about as far as relationship with self, that's certainly living, self-acceptance of a bisexual identity is living internally, watching and listening to other people talk about it within groups, it's living in relationship with others too. But it's still, if you're looking at physical contact as far as the sexual needs and wants, if you're looking at an emotional, day-to-day romantic attachment, if that's where somebody is part of somebody's bisexual identity, then there is, within a long-term monogamous relationship, opposite sex, as I say, there is a part that will be unlived, and there may be therefore sadness around that needs to be expressed, taken care of, perhaps some loneliness, loss, grief. So I'd be interested to know what you would say about that and how you manage that part and take care of that part. The thing that I would say about all of this in summary, these possibilities as far as how you can bring it into relationship, the most important thing is, there are options for people. I think as a base at the beginning, I think we really need to value that part, really need to accept that part. Then what it means as far as how it's brought into relationship or otherwise with others, as I say, there's lots of potential there. And how will you know when it's kind of an integrated part of self internally and also in relationship with others? Well, I think that's based on how you will feel. As I say, if you are experiencing anxiety, depression, chronic anger, those sorts of things, addictive behaviour, having a bisexual identity either not accepted internally or not in any way in relationship with others can really be fuel for that. So you could try these parts of the journey, these various ideas, these various ways of allowing it to live, and then just see the effect on you, see the effect on your emotional state, your psychological state, your body. Life is a long game. So just keep checking in with yourself, talk to a therapist who can help you with that, talk to your friends as well, if it is something you have spoken to them about. Generally, I'd be interested to know what you think of all of this and everything that I've talked about, anything that you might have found helpful, any other questions that you have, please do put them below the video as ever. Or, of course, some people just prefer to email me separately, so by all means do that. If there are certain things you would like me to add below this video that you think would be helpful for other people, then do just let me know them, and I shall certainly do that. If you like the video, please do give it a like. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. And as I say, I really hope this has been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I shall see you again soon.